right, we're going to continue our look at the book of Isaiah. You can open there if you're not already there. But before we continue, let's do some review questions first. First question, who was Isaiah referring to when he mentions the mean man in Isaiah 2:9? The average, common, yep, average or common. I get feedback from Corey whenever we're done with class, and she was utterly confused last Wednesday. And the reason is, I did not realize this, but the King James Version is about the only version that has the mean man as the words. I think a lot of other translations just have people. It doesn't really go into detail on what kind of people, but it says the mean man. And then, well, let's just read it real quick. Isaiah, just to get the context, start in verse 8. Isaiah 2 and verse 8. Their land also is full of idols. They worship the work of their own hands, that which their own fingers have made. And the mean man boweth down, and the great man humbleth himself. Therefore forgive them not. So, anybody have a different translation on their Bible there? The people. The people bow down. Yep, I noticed a lot of that says it just doesn't go into detail. The New American Standard Version, I says the common people, I think, is the actual translation. So the mean man, we understand that word mean. The mean of something in math is the average of something. And so, yeah. Okay. Yep, same thing. Doesn't go into detail on the two. But that one holds the same meaning because it gets the idea across that, well, let's go to the next review questions. I don't want to give it away. But the mean man that he's talking about, he's not a cruel man. He's a average. He's a common man. Which of the following demographics was guilty of idol worship in Idol's day? And it's based on, we only looked at Isaiah 2, 8, and 9 last week. So, C, all of the above. The demographics, the common man and the great man, we just read it in verse 9. Both were guilty of idol worship in Isaiah's day. And it's important. We tend to associate sin with certain demographics, don't we? And certain ones we leave out of it. And that's why we have things like, in recent years, the social justice movement and things like that, just ignoring the faults of one group and amplifying the faults of another, when all man has his idols, don't they? There's a reason in Isaiah's day for the average man to be an idol worshiper, or, he saw them as reasons. And then also the upper class, the rulers, they were all guilty of it. And how do we explain that? There's sin in every class of man. Every man is subject to it in one way or the other. So we looked at that. What was the question I asked about the? I've already forgotten. I didn't want to give it away with verse 2, but it might come to me later. What's tonight's memory verse? It's the same as last Wednesday's memory verse. I'll give you that hint. Nope, we're past Isaiah 2:3. We started a new one I think I heard Gail start it. 5:2? Close. 5:20. 5:20. I didn't give you enough time. I'm sorry. But yes, the memory work is Isaiah 5:20. It's actually a memory verse that we are all very familiar with. And let's fill in the blank. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put and light for darkness, that put and sweet for bitter. That's correct. So we can't think of anything today that the world around us calls good that is we can't think of anything they call good that's actually evil, can we? Is there anything we can think of? What does man call evil call good that is evil?
Nuclear family.
The nuclear family. It's bad. It's evil for a man to assume the headship over his family and subject his wife to himself. The wife staying home and being a homemaker. That's we've got to break the glass ceiling, right? We've got to let women break the glass ceiling, and they've got to have all the roles that man has. That's it's also calling good evil there, right? So, an example of someone calling, any more examples in the nuclear family? Homosexuality? Right, well, what do they call it? Pride, right? And I don't know what it is in Atlanta. I saw it on the local news recently. The rainbows are coming out. Picked Corey up at the airport Tuesday, and they've got the rainbow flag painting the over the thing you drive under again. I don't know. It's not June anymore. Apparently, they won October as well. But what do they say? They call it pride. That's another thing. Pride, is that a good thing in Scripture? Oh, they're taking pride to call something that the Bible condemns as evil, and they're saying that's good, and they're using a word that God says is evil and to say it's good. That makes sense. They're saying pride, June is Pride Month, celebrating this evil that they call good and using a word they think is good to describe it. There's a lot of this going around in the world around us. And what do we do as Christians? We gotta speak out against it. We cannot back down from it. We have to call it as God calls it. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. You could call them out. I don't care. Yeah.
They had a special service
Mm-hmm. Yep, and I know the Lutherans are doing it, but the
been doing it for a while.
Yep. Can we not see do we see those in the church calling it good? Do we see things happening among our brethren where they call things good that are actually evil?
Well, I don't think they call anything.
That's a good one. Yep. We've got to speak out against it. We cannot keep silent on these things, and we've got to call things as God calls them. We looked last week at Creation Week, where God says, "This is good. This is good." He created light. This is good. He separated the waters and put lights in the firmament, and he said it's good. He brought forth plant life. He said it's good. He brought forth everything. He brought forth man. He said he put man in the garden to till it. He had man naming the animals, all these things. He found out that man did not have a helpmeet. And he said that was not good, right? And then he created woman. And then at the end of Genesis chapter 1, what are the words he uses? After we know he created man and woman, he said it's very good. And it wasn't another man that was help meet for him. It wasn't an animal that was help meet for him. It was a woman. So what God calls good, we ought not to call evil. and what God calls evil, we ought not to call good. We ought not to put up with it. Our actions ought not to show that those things are good either. We can say things with our words, but we can practice things in a way that we say, oh, I accept this. This is acceptable. And so we ought not to call things evil that are good, and vice versa. And we talked about the obviousness. Nobody's going to mistake darkness for light or light for darkness. But they mistake males for females and other things today, right? Things that are obvious by nature, and they deny the obvious good and bad, good and evil. So that's our memory verse for. Mm-hmm. Yep. Right. You're right. There's a difference in the wording there that call it and put it. So they're replacing things. Perfectly describes the world around us, and it also perfectly described the world in Isaiah's day. So we ought to, yes.
I'm looking at that second line. That put darkness for light. That's in your face.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Blows me away.
Yep. It's obvious. Yep. So we're going to continue our look at the grounds for judgment against Judah. And of course, we're treating this like a court case. In any court case, you've got defendants, those that are on trial. You've got indictments, that's charges levied against the defendants. And then you have that trial and then the sentencing. Of course, in this case, these indictments against Judah, the sentencing, the conviction and the sentencing, it's decided by one, right? It's decided by God. But you have it brought up like a court case by Isaiah himself. We see it in verse 2 of chapter 1. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord hath spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me. So even the heavens and the earth poetically brought to witness against Judah in chapter 1 and verse 2. So the defendants. And we started this last Wednesday. We talked about the average Joe in chapter 2, verses 8 through 9. Also the great man and the lofty, which, did we talk a lot about the great man and the lofty last Wednesday? So we talked a bit about the average Joe. So you've got he's a different angle from the average Joe, the great man is. He's the higher, he's the ruling class, and also worships that which is made with his own hand. In verse 8, their land is also full of idols. They worship the work of their own hands, that which their own fingers have made. And so we talked about how that the average person may have bowed his knee to idols for the same reason that people believe you write a check to Benny Hinn, and you're going to receive 10 times as much back. You're going to get it back. It's called prosperity doctrine. And so we find that the poor today are victims to that a lot. And you have different sins that man will put things above his family and above God. He might go in and out of the convenience store, buy lottery tickets, and continually go back scratching. Why is he doing that? Because he wants that free money. He's put that above the stewardship of his funds. He's using that for his own gain and sinful gain at that. So he's got his own idols. The great man, the ruling class, has his own idols, and he might attribute his fortune, his fame, his power. He might attribute all of that to himself, right? He would say that he made that himself. He made that happen. He's same language in verse 8, chapter 2 and verse 8. They worship the work of their own hands. They've brought this about themselves. Of course, he's talking about idols there. That's ridiculous, isn't it? To take a stump of wood and carve it up into an animal of some sort, an image of something, and then that thing which you have just made, that image you've just made, you just bow down and worship it, right? That's ridiculous, isn't it? Man behaves ridiculously toward his idols. Well, we do it today. Well, currency is what? Currency, man made that, right? Football. What's football? Did God invent the sport of football? We might feel like that sometimes, right? But anything we decide to put in front of God, that's our idols. We've talked extensively about that. And all of these things are things that man's made. Man makes with his own hands.
This is again, it's your desire and what you yearn for
Mm-hmm.
in your life. It's interesting when we were reading this verse, the land is also full of idols. They worship the work of their own hands. It made me think of social media and how people, it's an industry now for people to craft their own lives online.
Mm-hmm.
And much of it not true, but it's almost they're building this false persona because they have this great desire to be something that they're not,
Mm-hmm.
And they're almost worshiping this kind of fake life that isn't.
Right.
It's a modern way to look at it, maybe.
It's another sense of making an image yourself with your own hands and worshiping it. But the great man, the lofty, sees this is the work that I did. I did this. I brought this about. And in doing so, a man that thinks everything he has is simply his work, it's not attributed to God blessing him with anything, is he going to see himself as a steward of those things? No, he's not. But even today, the powerful tend to forget God. They attribute what they have with their own work. They brought it about themselves. And I had a quote here. You probably recognize this quote. I'll just give you the quote and then who said it later, because I think you'll guess. Somebody helped to create this unbelievable American system that has allowed you to thrive. Somebody invested in roads and bridges. If you've got a business, you didn't build that. That's the quote you probably remember. You didn't build that. Somebody else made that happen. Anybody know who that was? Yeah, that was Obama in his re-election campaign in 2012, which had a lot of people talking. His intention was to say that, entrepreneurs, the little guy would be nowhere, or I guess they wouldn't be little guys, they'd be successful businessmen, and he's saying they'd be nowhere without government assistance, without the government's help. They'd be nowhere. And so I disagree with that sentiment, but he's right about one thing. We can't build things on our own. We are stewards of what we have. We've been given a lot, and if we're good stewards of those things, we have prosperity. We can have prosperity. But the things that we have, nothing we have would be possible if it weren't for God. And we need to recognize that. Who are we talking about, though? We're talking about Judah. And how many potential, I like to think of them, or I call them extinction level events. I was thinking about this recently. How many extinction level events did Israel face throughout the Old Testament? How many times were they in a situation where they would have been wiped out if it weren't for God? Quite a few, right? I mean, if you start at the beginning, you have Abraham and Sarah, who, God promised them a seed line, and many nations would come from Abraham, and they decide to do what? They say, well, we're old, Sarai at that point is not going to, she's not going to be giving birth anytime soon or at all. I mean, she's past that age. This is impossible. They took it into their own hands, what they were doing there. They thought God needed help. He didn't. That being said, why did Sarah give birth? It was God. Joseph's brothers, real stand-up guys, right? Really, really nice guys. They sold him into slavery and told their father that he was dead, even planted evidence to prove to him that he was dead. They're not great people, are they? So Joseph sold into slavery. He ends up where? In Pharaoh's house. He ends up all the way in Egypt. And what happens while Joseph's in Egypt? A drought, right? Yeah, there's a famine coming. And Joseph finds out about that. And Pharaoh, we know Joseph ends up being the second-hand man to Pharaoh. He advises Pharaoh. He has basically we're storing up, right? Because there's a famine coming. And Joseph's brethren, you think they would have survived if it weren't for Joseph being in Egypt? You think they would have survived if Joseph didn't have the trust in God that he had, and God, if God had, was Joseph interpreting those dreams on his own? No, he couldn't have done that on his own. It was God that did that. So his brethren make that journey to Egypt because guess who's got the food? Egypt does. Egypt wouldn't have had the food if it weren't for God. If Joseph were a lesser man, he would have had his brethren killed as soon as he saw them. Extinction level event. Those all of them would have been wiped out due to famine. You have later on the people are in the land of Egypt. They're captive. There arose a Pharaoh that knew not Joseph. We learn, and so the people are in captivity, and they could have just went off into anonymity for all of history, right? We know when different dynasties took power in Egypt, we sometimes think of Egypt as being one nation. It's like somehow it's the oldest nation in the world right now, but that's not the case. Different dynasties came in, and when those dynasties came in, they wiped out the history of the dynasties before them. That was just their practice. Israelites faced dissolving into obscurity when they were in Egypt. They were captives to those people. But let's just say, for instance, they decided they were just going to leave on their own. What's blocking their way back into Canaan? Or the Red Sea, right? They're going to get to the Red Sea, and what's going to happen? Joseph's just going to raise his rod, right? And the water's going to part. Is that what's going to happen? No, not without God. It's an extinction level event right there. Long story short, Judah here in the days of Isaiah, is Judah going to exist without God's help? No, but what do we read? We start, look at Isaiah 1 again. Starting in verse 2 actually. Hear, O heavens, and give ear, O earth, for the Lord hath spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me. The ox knoweth his owner, and the donkey his master's crib, but Israel doth not know, my people doth not consider. So he brought them up as children. He nourished them, yet they rebelled against him. Even the dumb ox knows who his master is, knows where he's getting fed, and the donkey as well, but Israel does not know. He says, all sinful nation, a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupters, they have forsaken the Lord, they have provoked the Holy One of Israel unto anger, they are gone away backward. So, the proud and lofty, the average man in Judah in Isaiah's time, he is, for one, he can't attribute anything that he has to these idols that he's created and he's worshiping. And the rich man, he can't attribute anything that he has to the work of his own hand. He wouldn't exist without God. So look at Isaiah 2, verses 11. Start with verse 10. Enter into the rock and hide thee in the dust for fear of the Lord and for the glory of his majesty. The lofty looks of man shall be humbled, and the haughtiness of men shall be bowed down, and the Lord alone shall be exalted in that day. For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon every one that is proud and lofty, and upon every one that is lifted up he shall be brought low. So we see they're going to be brought down. And how are they going to be brought down? Well, they're going to face hardship. We're about to see them and the campaigns of Assyria against them. That wasn't easy, even though Jerusalem survived. It still wasn't easy. But eventually we'll see that they go into captivity, into Babylonian captivity. So we have the great man and the lofty. I remember what I was going to get at in those questions. The reason the New American Standard Version can look at verse 9, the mean man boweth down and the great man humbleth himself, and he doesn't specify. He says just the people, is because it's everybody. It's from top to bottom. It's from the lowest of them to the highest of them. They're all idol worshipers, and they're all in sin. And is there a class of people in this nation here that is not calling good evil and evil good? Is there a single class of them that are not calling good evil or evil? Oh, right. Yep, all of them. So we can say we can identify with Isaiah. And the people that he's preaching to, we're preaching to those people today, the same types of people.
One of the really interesting things, too, when we talk about all of this, and all throughout the Old Testament, we see the Israelites, there's a lot of selfishness and a self-centered nature from the lowest to the highest. There's no humility, and so they turn from God, and then they get humbled, they turn back to God. It goes back and forth.
Yeah.
And the parallel, well, I mean, it's parallel because it's the same teaching from the same God. It's Christ on earth, the foundation of Christianity. As a Christian man or Christian woman, number one is you have to be humble. You have to humble yourself beside the Lord. It is where it's one of the hardest things for us to do, because I think we're as humans hardwired to not be humble,
right,
and to look inward. But we see it from all the way from Isaiah all the way through. It's a humongous lesson on humility. That's how hard it is for us to get to that lesson.
Yep.
Understand it.
Absolutely. We've got the lofty here, and then we have the lofty dependent that are addressed in the book of Isaiah. Let's turn over to Isaiah 7. If I could have somebody read Isaiah 7, verses 1 through 9.
Now it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up to Jerusalem to make war against it, but could not prevail against it. And it was told to the house of David, saying, Syria forces are deployed in Ephraim. So his heart and the heart of his people were moved as the trees of the woods and moved with the wind. Then the Lord said to Isaiah, go out now and meet Ahaz, you and Jessup, your son, at the end of the aqueduct from the upper pool to on the highway to the Lord's field, and say to him, take heed and be quiet, do not fear or be faint-hearted, for these two stubs of smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Rezin and Syria and the son of Remaliah, because Syria, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah have plotted evil against you, saying, let us go up against Judah and trouble it, and make us let us go up against Judah and trouble it, and let us make a gap in its wall and ourselves, and set the king over them, the son of Tabor. Thus says the Lord God. How far is it?
I think we can stop there, and I could just explain it real quick. Here we have Ahaz, who's one of the kings during Isaiah's time. And Israel, we know it's the divided kingdom at this point. Israel, the kingdom to the north, they've allied with Syria, and they're coming up against Judah. And who does Ahaz turn to? That Isaiah tells him not to turn to. Or rather, Isaiah tells him, we get a fuller picture in 2 Chronicles 28, 16 through 25, how he is warned not to go to other nations for help, right? And he goes to who? Assyria. He goes to Assyria. We learn from 2 Chronicles 28 that he takes treasures from the temple and pays tribute to Tiglath-Pileser and the king of Assyria. And does Assyria help him against Syria and Israel? No, he doesn't even end up helping him. But he ends up paying tribute to him over and over again. We find out just through history that Hezekiah will come, a king, a good king, and says, well, we're not paying tribute to them anymore. And then Assyria comes against Judah. We can blame that on Ahaz. But what was Ahaz doing here? Ahaz was being dependent on man, something God told Israel and Judah not to do. We have many throughout the Old Testament. King Asa sought help from Ben-Hadad, the king of Aram, against Baasha, king of Israel, against Hananiah's advice. That's in 2 Chronicles 16. You have King Hoshea, who is the last king of Israel, sought an alliance with Egypt against Assyria. That's in 2 Kings 17, 3 through 4. They were told not to depend on other nations, depend on other men, but they do that because they see these people as powerful. And unfortunately, in the minds of kings like Ahaz, and we see that in Isaiah chapter 7, starting in verse 10. I know we're over, but starting in verse 10, moreover, the Lord spake again unto Ahaz, saying, ask thee a sign of the Lord thy God. Ask it either in the depth or in the height above. But Ahaz said, I will not ask, neither will I tempt the Lord. So Isaiah says, you're going to be fine. Syria and Israel, it's going to come to nothing. But ask a sign of the Lord. Ahaz says, no, I'm not going to do that. And what do we learn from 2 Chronicles 28? He's afraid. He's still afraid despite what he's being told. He goes to Assyria for help. So, grounds for judgment, the average Joe, everybody, the lofty dependent, and Ahaz is a good example of that. We'll talk about this next week. The culture of the women in Judah was very evil, and in general, the people in chapter 3, verses 13 through 15. Any comments or questions before we dismiss? Mm-hmm.
That God gives us. What we're seeing here, really simply put, is you have to value spiritual over physical.
Right.
And it's really
Mm-hmm.
pounded in the heads of the disciples and our heads today. It's
Yeah.
really hard for us to get there, but that's the lesson.
Right. And what does Isaiah says everything's going to be okay. He says, don't worry about Syria and Israel. But what does he tell Ahaz? He says, ask God for a sign. And that's something that God has done for righteous men throughout the Bible. He did that with Joshua. He says, ask for a sign. Well, I'll show you. You know, the fleece is dry in the morning and the dew and the grass around it is wet. Then you're going to know. And he gave Ahaz the same opportunity. Why did Ahaz not take it? Because he's not spiritually minded, didn't think about God, didn't trust God the way he should have. Thank you, everybody, and we'll continue here next Wednesday. Socializing or just straight school? Just all education? I wasted too much time on that when I was there.